Hello, everyone. Kevin Clark here. This is the PCI community call for Sunday, April 2nd. We're delighted to have you with us. Our guest is Jerry Michalski, and we're going to talk about Jerry and his topic in just a moment. He's in the flesh, even though we have Cyborg in the title, right? So we'll unpack that in just a moment. Before we go any further, I want to have Mei Lin Fung join us. She has something she'd like to share with us. Mei Lin?
Thank you. And thank you, Kevin, for hosting this as you do. It's an amazing lineup of speakers that you bring for our community. And it's wonderful to have Jerry speaking. And I think it's the first time to our community.
In this group, yes.
I wanted to give a brief announcement. Just about half an hour ago, I sent a note out to the community about our efforts in Puerto Rico. And we are looking for leads to foundations right now to support the work that we're doing with Puerto Rico, the Prosperity Initiative. And we have an unprecedented level of support across the U.S. federal agencies to take Puerto Rico as a case study example of a pivot to a green, resilient value chain, digitized value chain. So I hope that if you have friends or connections to philanthropic organizations, that you will connect to me, and I can take it with you to the next step. Thank you.
Thank you, Mei Lin. And we should probably repeat that at the end of our call today as we start to wrap up. So it's exciting to hear that progress. Well, on to Jerry. Jerry, we're delighted to have you with us. I have known Jerry for quite some time. He was a member of the IBM Industry Advisory Council for ThinkPad. I would say that he was one of our key contributors and was adamant, right, meeting after meeting, that Ethernet was the way to go. Despite the fact that we were advocates for our own technology called token ring at the time, but Ethernet won out for sure, right?
Never mind SNA.
So we're delighted that he's with us, and we go back, decades. So I'm looking forward to your remarks today, your life as a cyborg. And the tech that he's about to describe, I use in a very small, focused way, right? He uses it expansively. Jerry, we're delighted to have you with us.
And I am delighted to be here with you. Thank you for the invite. Kevin, I was just sort of figuring out this talk and what to do about it. And you were like, would you like to do this for PCI? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So I'm very happy to be here. I have, with apologies, I have sort of a presentation, kind of a deck here. And I'd love to go through it with you all to talk about Confessions of a Cyborg. And this is the title because I was describing what I was up to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, great topic, but my life as a cyborg kind of boring. So how about something more interesting like Confessions of a Cyborg? And I'm like, that's it. So this is the premiere of this talk. This is sort of the first pitch, if you'll indulge me some spring training conversation, but here we go. And the topic is, just to frame it, there's a lot about the future of work. That's kind of the core of where I'm going. But as you'll see, it bleeds into the future of humanity a whole bunch. And then just to ground you now, as we walk in, are any of you like a spreadsheet wizard, or PowerPoint, or Photoshop, or TikTok, or have any of you kind of melded with your technology in some really interesting, comfortable way? Well, congratulations, you're kind of a cyborg too. And what I mean here is, when you feel like this software is an extension of your fingertips and your brain, and that you don't have to think really hard about what the command is for anything, it is just like, it eases you, it gives you some superpowers that you wouldn't have otherwise, like what if analysis in spreadsheets. I remember when I first saw that in 1981, that's what caused me to buy an Apple II Plus. And I was like, that's really cool. So you're a cyborg. Now, let me give you a little bit of background for how I got here. There we go. So my first job in the world has been fully and successfully automated. I worked at Mobil before it was ExxonMobil in their national headquarters, and I found online, because I never took one, or if I did, it's in a box somewhere, a picture of the flying red O little sculpture that was standing outside our building. I was a glorified rate clerk, basically a freight rate analyst. And Kevin and I were just comparing notes because he did some of this also for in retail. And that job, where I walked into a room full of paper tariffs every day, has been completely and successfully automated. And automation is a big theme here in the future of work. In 1988, I wrote a report called Neural Networks, Prospects for Commercial Use for New Science Associates, the company that I worked for before I joined Esther, which I'll talk about in a sec. So this was in fact the second lifetime of neural networks, and part of my job as a tech industry trends analyst was to figure out who's competing here and where's this going to go. So I wrote that, and then in '92 I joined Esther Dyson, started writing her newsletter, Release 1.0, which printed mostly on dead trees, except I also had to upload it to Amex, if anybody remembers the American Information Exchange, and then later I think we got on Lotus Notes, but I think we did. Anyway, then in 1995, following a briefing in our offices, Kevin invited me to join, and it could have been 96, we're not exactly sure the dates, but he invited me to join the Mobile Computing Advisory Council. And I just recently opened up a time capsule box in which I had put the plaque that he gave me years ago for being a member there. And that's been a really fun journey. So let me go back now to the big picture, and I'm going to paint the big picture bigger for a second, and then go back to just define what's a cyborg and where does this go. So the future of work, automation figures really large in the future of work, and I want to give you two extreme scenarios for how automation might play out. Falck and Brave New World. Falck is fully automated luxury communism. So there's a fellow who basically wrote a book on this. And the idea of fully automated luxury communism is, hey, look, the machines are getting really good at creating abundance. They can take care of automation. They can take care of food production. They can make our houses now. They can repair themselves. We're going to have a really cozy, relaxed lifestyle. And all of the normal economic assumptions of capitalism are going to fall apart because we will kind of need either a basic income or something else. There's a whole series of ideas there. And way before that, John Maynard Keynes in 1930 wrote a famous piece called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, where he said, hey, this technological progress thing is really cool. We may be able to scale way back on the number of hours we live. And if you have time, read the poem All Watched Over by Machines of Love and Grace by Richard Brautigan, which I was tempted to start this call with, but I sort of don't have time. At the opposite end of the field are dystopian science fiction novels where we become slaves to the machine, the Matrix, what have you. Pick your favorite sci-fi novel. This is kind of the range of outcomes. And one of the differences between whether we go left or right or whatever that axis is are we augmenting or replacing humans? There are other factors here, but one of the really important ones is this question, augment or replace. And I will say grudgingly that much of the technology that I've seen implemented recently, like robotic automation and all that kind of stuff, has really been the replace variety. It's like, how many full-time employees can we get rid of, or how many workers can we get rid of? And I think that the interesting path here is augment. And when I talk about cyborgs, I'm talking really about augmentation. And recently, one of the hot forms of augmentation is artificial intelligence, large language models, ChatGPT, all those kinds of things. And I will touch on those. But I'm equally interested in the augmentation of organizational memory, of us as humans collaborating with these extended superpowers to build collaborative intelligence, some extended mind, some ability to do things together. I think that's really genuinely important, and we're not doing nearly enough of that. One of the questions that pops up here is, what does it mean to be a good cyborg? And I'll get to that. And then dangling out at the periphery of all these issues are things like the singularity, like, oh my gosh, are we accelerating technology so quickly right now that we're going to slip through some place beyond which we're not exactly sure what the world is like? Maybe like fully automated luxury communism, maybe more than that, maybe even different from that. And I'll get there a little bit as well as we go. First, what do I mean cyborg? It's a cybernetic organism fused together around 1960. Cybernetic means cybernetics, which is Norbert Wiener back in 1948. He published this book, Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. He was talking about systems with feedback loops. So it was really systems thinking, early systems thinking. There's a bunch of other systems thinkers who I'm big fans of, but he was in a very important one. And this notion of cybernetics was important. If you want to really scroll back, it dates back to the Kybernetos, or the steersman on Greek ships. I think before they invented the rudder, which is at the end, at the stem of the ship at the stern, they had a steerboard, which was attached to the right side because most people were right-handed, hence the word starboard or steerboard, and port, because you didn't want to wreck your steerboard, you would dock your ship on the other side. So that was the port side of the ship, hence port and starboard. So cybernetics also gives us cyberspace and a bunch of the fantasies that we're walking into now. Now, in popular fiction, Cyborg raises a whole bunch of things like this. So Terminator 2, some cyborg technology might actually try to kill us or save us from the other cyborg trying to kill us, something like that. Clearly I'm picking up sort of the best aspects of Cyborg that I can. Sigourney Weaver in the external mech warrior is maybe another notion here of the mechanical extensions that give you greater power than you have as a single human. That's another maybe version of it. And I discovered that there's one of the first Black superheroes in the DC Comics universe is named Cyborg, and he's on the lower left here. There's also the Borg from Star Trek, and that's the Queen of the Borg on the upper right. But the cyborgish person that I kind of want to draw our attention to a little bit, maybe metaphorically, is Iron Man, and not the marathons or the triathlons, but rather this guy. And I mean this because he has physical extensions in the suit that lets him fly and has super strength, but he's also sort of melded with Jarvis and this interface. And he's talking to an assistant, and he has software and so forth that really extends his capacities in remarkable ways. That's really interesting. And the piece that I'm going to focus on a lot is software. So we can also set aside robots, androids. Here's a little chronology. You can find R2-D2 and C-3PO here, and Robbie the robot from Lost in Space, and Metropolis, and Bender is in there. It's a whole bunch of, let's set robots and androids aside. We don't need to worry about them for right now. Now, it could be that you're already more of a cyborg than you think. So do you wear glasses? I've got glasses on right now. I'm pretty bad at reading anything without them. Contacts are glasses that are hidden on your body, so I can't really tell you're wearing glasses. Many people wear watches. I actually haven't worn a watch for a while. You might have a Fitbit or an Oura ring. You might actually have had surgery and have a pacemaker or cochlear implant, or maybe even you've devised an artificial pancreas. There's a DIY artificial pancreas project that's super interesting, so that you don't have to keep metering your blood sugar and injecting yourself. You actually have a system inside your body that does that for you. A bunch of people have needed prostheses for different reasons. That's sort of hardware. So I'm thinking software, but a friend made an interesting observation that a well-designed automobile or other vehicle is also a natural extension of our body. When we're parking or driving around, we think of that far right corner of the car as an extension of our body, and we're busy maneuvering all of us, the whole car and us around. The automobile certainly gives us more reach and speed and some protection against the elements and so forth. So that's a bit of and in particular, if you're a good driver, you might feel yourself as a cyborg that way as well. But back to this idea, are you a spreadsheet whiz, or are you a prolific poster online? Are you really good at social media? Any of those things? What else might be sort of on your list of capacities here? Now, there have been some cyborgy failed efforts, notably Google Glass. Remarkably quickly, people who were wearing Google Glass got known as glass holes, and got kind of ostracized a bit. That failed rather rapidly. 3D TV didn't do well. I'm predicting Facebook's metaverse is a money pit for Facebook and a doomed venture for general purpose computing, sort of the stuff that all of us do. But coming soon, there's some interesting ventures like neural lace and other kinds of brain-machine interfaces, cognitive prosthetics, and transhumanism. All these topics are things that are interesting, but really at the periphery for me. And maybe someday, 10 years from now, if somebody says, hey, Jerry, would you like to be a neural lace guinea pig? I might sort of volunteer for that, but I'm not sure. I'm more interested in sort of how we interact closely with software, because it gives us personal superpowers. And it's these personal superpowers that are super, super intriguing to me, because I think our future is largely cyborg. That kind of, like it or not, a lot of us are going to wind up needing to understand how to use these sorts of tools to extend our capacities sharply. And in this world, we need to figure out how to be good cyborgs, which I'll come back to in a sec. So my cyborgness started in December of 1997, so 25 plus years ago. And basically, I was there was this mind mapping app called The Brain. I was the first stop on their first press tour. And the inventor of The Brain, Harlan Hugh, told me later, Jerry, that was a bad thing that happened to us because we had this funny expectation that everybody else on the press tour was going to react like you did, and they didn't. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because I saw it and I took to it like a duck to water. So the file that I'm about to show you is the same file. So what I just showed you was a screen cap of it, but I'm going to take you into my brain in just a second. That is, I'm still feeding the same file that I started in 1997. I've got just one data file, which is weird. Other brain users don't do it the way I do it. This one brain file has more than 500,000 thoughts in it. Each node is called a thought. I'll explain that. And linked by more than 1,200,000 links. If you do the math, it's about 50 or 60 a day that I've put in by hand. So think of it as bookmarking in your browser. You hit something and you're like, oh, I should bookmark that. Except most people, once they've hit 1,000 bookmarks in their browser, realize they're never, ever going to find a bookmark in their browser again because that software is so worthless. So this is the world's largest man-made mind map. And I make it available openly online for free. So if you go to jerrysbrain.com, no apostrophe, no space, you can browse it for free. And I can give you links to any thought in my brain directly. Things like that are really quite interesting. So let me step out of Google Slides and go over to the brain, to the same location that I was just showing you in my brain. So this is the same thought, except this is my live brain. This is a talk, an interview, actually, a TED interview of Jonathan Haidt titled, "Can a Divided America Heal?" It happens right after Trump won the election. So I've got it connected to best articles about Trump's win. And here's a bunch of other articles. And then I have a whole bunch of articles about, here's the, wow, Trump wins. I added this thought on November 8th, 2016. And you know, you can sort of see the last 12 days of election 2016, all of that was going on. But let me go back to Jonathan Haidt. The little thoughts that are clicking along the bottom here are like breadcrumbs. So I can go back to anything I passed. And let me show you how this brain thing works. And an easier way is to go to a simpler screen. So the interviewer in this particular interview is Chris Anderson, who is the guy who runs TED. He's not the guy who founded TED, but he runs TED. He's married to Jackie Novogratz. So you'll see that I can only link thoughts to each other through these three little circles called gates. The thought in the middle, and there's always one thought in the middle, is called the active thought. And these are called thoughts because this software is called the brain. So this little arrangement of three circles is actually brilliant because it forces me to decide is something above, below, or beside the current active thought. But it doesn't tell me ontologically or taxonomically what that direction means. It lets me figure that out. So I use lateral links for marriage. I use it for opposites, you know, east and west are linked, you know, with this lateral jump. I use it also for service relationships. So funding relationships for startups, for example, are represented this way. And remember that when this little company shows up in my life, I'm a tech industry trends analyst, and I need to know who invested in who competes with whom, what products do they have, all that kind of stuff. And this turns out to be perfect software for that. But just to show you that I can go all kinds of places, Chris Anderson attended the Woodstock School, which was in Landar, and was actually a boarding school in India. And one of the and Landor is a hill station, which was one of the British-only towns in India that were higher uphill, so they could avoid the heat of summer during the British Raj. And I've got a bunch of stuff about the British Raj and the British Empire and the British East India Company, which is all under India, which is a brick country and part of the Mughal Empire once upon a time, et cetera, et cetera. So let me go back to Jonathan and do one more thing here. Under this, and this icon, which is unfortunately a little dim here, is actually a link directly to the thought on the web. So anywhere you see a fave icon, that means I've embedded a link that'll take you to Amazon, where you can buy the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which he mentions in this talk. He mentions negative partisanship, that we're voting against, not for things. And one of the things he says, these are sort of quotes I took from the talk. He says, both sides think the other is a threat to the nation. A statement I really agree with. And I linked it to my existing thought, America is bitterly split. It will be hard to heal. And this is about US political polarization, and not just in the Trump era, but sort of before, but this notion that there are two Americas, red America, blue America, all of that. I track it. And here's an Atlantic article, New York Times, a YouTube video, a Beast article, et cetera, Huffington Post article, et cetera. These are basically sources that I'm connecting in to this. So I'll go back to the presentation, but this is a taste of the kind of memory. Now, I never look at all 500,000 plus thoughts in my brain. I don't ever look at the ball of twine view on this set of data. I would be maybe interested to do it sometime, but it's irrelevant to me. What's relevant to me is that at each screenful, every time I zoom in on something, it makes a ton of sense. I will also say you can usually ignore the column of thoughts on the right. These are called sibling thoughts. They're children of a common parent. So you'll see here, they're linking back to some of these parent thoughts of the current active thought. And these are children of the current active thought. So back to our show, which was already in progress. So this brain software works great for me, and this is not a pitch that you should all use the brain at all. The brain is not for everyone. For a bunch of people that I know, there's a few people that I know who've figured it out, and they go to my brain as a reference resource whenever. There's a bunch of other people who are like, Jerry, looks like a ball of twine to me, not so sure about it. And they might like a tool called Kumu, which is terrific for drawing systems diagrams. Other people might like Rome Research, and there's a whole bunch of tools for thinking is kind of the umbrella that I put it under right now that are super interesting. And one of the interesting things that needs to happen right now is we need to figure out how to cooperate together to build shared memory while using different tools. We need to come into this using our favorite tool that gives us the best superpowers for our way of perceiving the world. April, who's on the call here, has a calendric mind. She can tell you what we were doing today for the last 7 years, very likely. I can't tell you what I was doing 7 days ago without consulting my digital memory. So we have different kinds of superpowers, right? And this is a little funny, but I'm availing myself of some metaphors here. I've felt for 25 years like a lonely ant at the fungus face. What do I mean? Well, I have to back up a little bit and borrow from nature. You've probably heard of leafcutter ants, right? So leafcutter ants can't actually metabolize or digest leaf matter. So why on earth are they up in trees, biting off big hunks of leaves bigger than them and carrying them off into the hive? The answer is, in the hive, they hand those leaves off to a subgroup of the same ant, which mulches up the leaves, and the spit and the leaf matter they put on a fungus, which they have a symbiotic relationship with. Leafcutter ants are also known as farmer ants because they're farming a fungus. Happy fungus, happy hive. And in fact, the little white powder you see on the back of the ant there, biologists went and studied the white powder on the thorax of these ants, and they discovered that there was a symbiotic bacterium that helped keep the fungus healthy, that had sort of grown up in this culture, in this ecosystem of ecosystems. So for me, when I add something to my brain and I put it in the right place, I get a little oxytocin or dopamine hit in my brain of like, it's sort of like when you found that puzzle piece that you've been looking for an hour or two, and you click it in place, and it's like, that's what happens to me because I know that I've settled something in this large context that's going to be useful later. Mycelium fungus makes a great metaphor. I don't have time to go all through all of this, but there's just symbiosis happening everywhere. The hyphae are the little leading tips of mycelium, like the root tips of mycelium. They connect everything underground. They're busy talking to tree roots and everything else. Healthy soil, which has usually a lot of mycelium in it, means I'm using it metaphorically to talk about healthy data, like a layer of healthy soil that we all need to share into. And then mushrooms have many, many uses, from bioremediation to psilocybin and trippiness, all of which are really interesting and fun to play with here. Of course, I bought thebigfungus.org. You can go there. There isn't much on that site, but if you ask me, like, what is Wikipedia, I can tell you that it's an encyclopedia written by volunteers for donations that's openly available on the web. And I can tell you what servers it runs on. Everything is very easy because it's an encyclopedia on a wiki. I'm saying here that we need to tell each other what we know and what we believe with a mix of tools. That's going to be hard. So metaphors like mycelium and the big fungus, I think, are really useful here, and intentionally a little bit playful, but maybe also a little bit confusing. So let me know what you think. My cycle here using the brain is that 50 or 60 times a day, I think, oh, here comes a piece of information in the info torrent. Is this worth remembering? And then where do I put it in the brain? Because I have to hang it somewhere. I don't like orphan thoughts in the brain. What should I call it? What else should I connect it to? And what else can I learn? And then on to the next thing. If I'm not doing very much, this is a 20-second task. If I get distracted, it's an hour-long task. But generally, it's like just a couple minutes. And so think of it as a more elaborate form of bookmarking your browser, but that builds this added context over time. But the effects of doing this thing are really interesting. My unaided recall is better than it normally would be. I just know it, partly because every time I go into the brain, I get refreshed. My wet neurons in my brain classic get refreshed so that I now see things again and can remember them better. But also every time I'm curating things in, I'm going into system 2 thinking. So initial recall is even better. I'm always being bumped into system 2 thinking. This is from Danny Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. System 1 is our knee-jerk response to everything, and it's often wrong. System 2 is when you have to slow down a bit and engage the gears. And the process I just explained on the left here is what those gears look like for me when I'm busy curating this brain thing. Interestingly, the brain, partly because of its little magic with the 3 gates, always gives me a sense of orientation and gives me a sense that I'm improving this large context. I don't get lost in it. I don't fill up a page and have to tear it off and start a new page and then wonder why I can't connect this page to that page. This particular tool blows right past that, doesn't do that whatsoever. So I love that. And then I'm putting in the brain, as I think I showed you, not just facts, but my own opinions, and my opinions externalized in a way that's computer searchable. Now, there's no API right this second to the brain, unfortunately, but anybody can go in and look around. And right now there's a hot project to sort of connect my brain, couple it to ChatGPT somehow, and kind of go crazy on this part of it, because I think that's really, there's a lot of potential right there. So the cool thing is that knowledge really accumulates and gets better over time. That's a point that's hard to make because we have so little experience of this. It's weird. We're so used to drowning in the information flood that the idea that something could get better over time doesn't really dawn on us. And don't worry, again, if you're thinking of using the brain, it's useful once you've put 100 things in it. And then a great part of the fun, of the joy of using it, is inventing the cliches and the methods for representing and doing stuff, the things that I invented over time that I now rely on. Figuring those out was a whole lot of fun. So what does it mean to be a good cyborg? First, good to whom? It could be that being a good cyborg means being a really well-behaved cog in the large new matrix style enterprise. And I'm not sure we want that, right? It also kind of means realizing that you have an extended self now, and thinking about that extended self the way you think about the front right bumper when you're turning your car in traffic. I have opinions and data about me out in the world that other people are bumping into. And as AI is hitting this, it's getting really interesting. But I'm really trying to make sense of things in a social way. So call it social sense making, collaborative intelligence. There's a bunch of names for it. But I'm trying to figure out, I think being a good cyborg means participating with others in this sense making operation. And for me, that translates into working wikily, some people call it, which just means working with the garage door open, trying to build a betterverse with others. And betterverse is a term I coined as a protest for Zuckerberg's metaverse vision, which I really don't like. I'm not that crazy about the Web3 crypto betterverse ideas either. And I think that building a betterverse means with the intention of making the world a better place, which means solving problems together and sharing data and being honest about things, and also resolving trust issues along the way. So this also means curating commons together. So mostly working to feed the new digital commons rather than having a brain and being a cyborg so that I know more than everybody and I can be an evil genius on top of my mountain. So how we do cyborg, how each of us and all of us together do this cyborg thing is going to bend the field toward good or evil, augment or replace. Is it evil or isn't it? How do we program it? When do we raise our hand to say this thing that I'm doing right now is not ethical or not good for people and we should do something else? Now, I'm going to pause for a second because take everything I just said, now add in AI, machine learning, ChatGPT, if you will, as a placeholder for all of the new AI that's showing up in the marketplace. And this thing sort of explodes. So this is what's happening right now in the project I described a moment ago, which is like, how do we add ChatGPT to my brain? And these are just riffs right now. We haven't done any of these things, but these are ways of playing out how GPT could help me. First, it could help me curate my brain. Every day I sit here and I filter stuff. It could perfect the things that I add by hand. Hey, Jerry, I see that you just added a book and an author. Can I add metadata so that those are labeled as book and author? And would you like me to put all 5 of her other books in for you? And I'd be like, yeah. Although I have a particular bias for seeing everything that goes in my brain file. I don't want to automatically load a bunch of stuff in, but if I didn't have to do the manual labor as much, that would be terrific. It could suggest additions. It could add those automatically. It could look in my brain data and find patterns and insights. It could create media based on my brain, like video scripts or actual video animations. It could write posts and maybe books or book chapters. It could generate narrative tours through paths in my brain, which I love to do myself. It could discover commonalities between what I've put in my brain and what other people have said or done. And eventually, it could probably represent me because I've externalized more of me. This is what got me thinking that I'm maybe a cyborg, like big time, is that I've externalized more of me than most people I know. So that's kind of where the frontier of that is. And then this talk is called Confessions of a Cyborg. So here are my confessions. First, AI did not help me create this presentation yet. I think the next couple revs of this might well have a lot of collaboration. Second, this, and when I say this, I mean that curating of information and that connecting with other people and sharing notes is what flow feels like to me. I get lost in Csikszentmihalyi's flow concept of just, time goes away and I feel like I'm sort of doing something in unison with others and in flow. Third, I'm already starting to have boundary issues with AI. So I've externalized what I believe. That's interesting. There's no actual right bumper. There's conceptually a bunch of information I have out there. And one of the things I've been playing with is, should I super distribute my brain data? Should I just give away a free copy of most of my brain data to anybody who wants to start something like this? And then they go off and do things with it and fork it. And that's a little crazy making because it's like, okay, where do I end and where do other people start? And how do I come back to just me? So that's already happening to me. And we are early down this journey. The last couple of months when ChatGPT really hit the media got me starting to think that we may actually be slipping into the singularity. Now, ChatGPT was originally built on GPT 3.5. Now we're up to 4, which means there was 1, 2, 3 before that. This thing has been around for a while. They've been working on it. They've been at the salt mines for a while. This thing has just splashed big. And I don't think this is like a lot of other bubbles that have happened. I think this is actually really real and useful. It has a lot of problems, which I'm happy to talk about. It hallucinates answers. It does a bunch of other sorts of things. In fact, I'll open up some of those questions in just a sec. But I think that we may be slipping into some place that we should pay attention to, where acceleration happens faster and faster, and we suddenly need to sort of talk to each other and hang on to our shoulders because it's going to get pretty interesting here. And then I know my intentions, and as a cyborg, I'm not going to try to kill you or rob you or whatever else, but I'm not so sure about those other cyborgs. And so I confess that this world that we're slipping into, and I think that, I think Italy just declared a moratorium on ChatGPT. They also said that English words are bad for Italians, so we have to block those. They're turning into France a little bit, which has always been militant about keeping French. But how do we figure all those corners? So folding ChatGPT, machine learning, large language models, image generation, deep fakes, and all that raises a bunch of monster questions. Oh my gosh, is this thing conscious? Is it evil? Can we control it? Can it explain itself? Is it eating all creativity? Are all creative writers and artists doomed? If the search engines start eating what the hallucinations create, are we losing our grip on truth? Are we post-peak knowledge? Is it actually a question I read about in an article recently? Are we approaching artificial general intelligence, which is software that is as smart and as commonsensical as humans are? And you can have whatever opinions you want about how smart humans are these days. Sometimes we don't look so smart, and I've got some opinions about all these, but not enough time to go it. And have we actually hit this sort of tractor beam into the singularity? These are all important questions that I recommend you are familiar with, have a light opinion about, but don't let these distract you from the work at hand of figuring out what kind of cyborg are you and how to be a good cyborg. So these are monster questions. They're really important questions, but they're also sometimes distractions. And you can get stuck in the eddies of any one of these and then not go figure out how to play in this new pool. So my goal in particular is the collaboration between human and machine intelligence to create, basically to make better collaborative decisions. Because I think that we've been making some dumb decisions together for a variety of reasons. I'm happy to elaborate in Q&A or at some other time, but there's a lot of names for this. Collective intelligence. I just learned about X-telligence. There's been, are we approaching super intelligence? The noosphere is Teilhard de Chardin. It's got a bunch of different names, but how do we make better decisions together? And that involves something I haven't really talked about at all so far, but is a big issue for me over the last couple of decades, which is trust. If I don't trust you, at least enough to talk to you, I will never look at your shiny argument that is modeled with irrefutable evidence in a tool that makes it look so pretty where I can follow all the tendrils down, etc. Doesn't matter. Because if I've been convinced that you eat your young and have green blood, I will never, ever talk to you. So there's a piece of this effort that's also about bridging that cultural divide and figuring out how do we talk to people who scare us, people who are not like us, people whose opinions are very different from ours, and maybe even how do we coax them into expressing their opinions in the same way, in the same medium, so that we can compare notes, so that we can sort things out and make better decisions together. So my horizons right now are this Jerry's Brain plus ChatGPT. I'm writing a Neo book, which is sort of a collection of books that publish more or less concurrently and that share chapters or nuggets inside. I'm doing this multiplayer sense-making thing. I'm trying to inoculate the big fungus with my brain data so that other people can build on it and keep going. I'd be happy to join anybody who's built a similar thing with any other tool. I'm trying to be the Chuck Yeager of this new shared memory, the test pilot. I'm trying, because I've got 25 years of track record doing this, and I think I'm leaning into what this might turn into and what the possibilities are. I'm trying to paint the possibilities large and optimistically with a jaded optimism, perhaps. I'm also trying to learn to be a good cyborg. You're seeing the first version of this Confessions of a Cyborg presentation, which could be a workshop, could be a boot camp, could be a bunch of things. I'm interested in your feedback. My sort of here to start wrapping up, my call to action to you. First, what kind of cyborg are you? What are your cyborg superpowers? How do you find your way to the tools that actually work for you? And there's no science here. It's art right now. And I recommend joining some communities that are doing different kinds of things. And right now, there's a bunch of different tools that are quite different from each other, don't talk very much to each other. And I think of them as bonfires on the horizon. And a lot of these bonfires are very inwardly focused. They're talking to themselves about their tool or method, call it settle custom or build a second brain or whatever else. There's sort of internal methodologies. And I'm really interested in the sharing. Organizationally, there's a bunch of interesting questions. This is sort of the future of knowledge management and a bunch of other things. How do you get your org to lean in? How do you get individuals to share more? How do you turn this from need to know to need to share? From execution matters more than secrecy. And then recommend, join our conversations. We've got Open Global Mind is a group that a community of practice that I helped start at the start of lockdown. So it's 3 years old now, and we've got a series of different conversations around these topics and a bunch of people who are exploring these issues. This is a snapshot that Pete Kaminsky took of a bunch of our Zooms as a mosaic of Zooms. So we've been doing this for quite a while. So my advice to you is be a good cyborg and feed the big fungus. And at this point, there's some links here for resources. Cyborgconfessions.com is just barely up. It's just a web page. It doesn't really have much, but it's a start. jerrysbrain.com has more, and that's how to reach me. And I would love feedback, advice, what have you. All of that would be fantastic. So let me take questions and whatever else. Kevin, over to you.
And Jerry, as we proceed, if when your fingers are free, put some of those links into chat, because that keeps those are our permalinks, right, to what's going on, during these discussions.
Doing that
So
now.
we heard from some folks while you were speaking, really engaging topic. I hope it gets expression in some places now that you've given it a test drive. Ben Konsinski, you were first along with Jerry, all right, long before this call started. You had some comments, so jump in, my friend.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the trigger of what sleep means to your brain, and and how we leverage the opportunity of sleep. It sounds like it's at rest unless you perturb it. And how do we make it more self-active itself, as well as your API links to Chat GPT, to GPT-4, and so forth as well. And what does it mean to have what's hygiene of the brain, and organization, reorganization, just as sleep would be exercised for your human brain.
Thank you. And so it's funny because this is called the brain, but it has no machine learning in it. There's no AI in it. It is not, the brain has never recommended what to save or where to put it or anything like that. It's more like Photoshop for ideas. And that's the way I've treated it for 25 years. So the idea of coupling it to intelligence is really interesting and opens up this question of, oh, what if we wake it up and let it, and what if it is then active when I'm not active? Now, it is active when I'm not awake or something, because my brain server, the data, is available whenever anybody just goes and makes a query. It's on 24/7 duty, and that's fine. But I like your sort of direction of what happens when it's active and actually doing things. What happens when it's representing me as an agent out in the world? And that gets really, really interesting. And that's where these boundary issues start showing up. I mean, it's funny. We think about androids, and androids have like this one-to-one relationship, unless, of course, you're building a robot army like Dr. Evil would try. In which case you've got like replicants, and you might have hundreds of thousands so that you can overwhelm the good guys. But generally, we don't think that software is easily replicated, and there could be thousands and thousands of instances, each acting independently or in concert on my behalf. That's interesting and scary in the same breath, right? And I'm interested in mingling my brain with others, for example, but one of my prerequisites is a big red panic button, so that when I feel my boundary issues rise up, I can hit the big red button and see only what I put in. I want to always be able, I want to share openly everything I'm sort of helping create and build, but I want to be able to go back and see only what I put in, because I know what that was. And that's that's sort of my cyber reality in some sense.
It raised also the question of versioning and establishing special lenses and contexts that I might be viewing the brain, not with even yourself, let alone when you start sharing. And and it creates the opportunity then to look at version elements. And
versioning is super interesting. We've been using markdown files on GitHub repos to emulate a wiki in Open Global Mind a bit, because wikis save versions of every page, which is really cool in wiki software. But GitHub is where coders go to put open source code and other kinds of code. But if you put documents on GitHub, you can save versions, and that's really interesting. So the combination of, hey, show me what we presented 2 years ago is an easy task when you save versions and you start to save paths through these ideas. And that's a sub project I've got in front of me. In fact, it's on my list of things to do right now.
Yeah, it's a private Wayback Machine. Maylin, you also commented in chat. We'd be delighted to have your thoughts for Jerry.
I noticed that I am one of the few people from the East, having been born in Singapore, and just want to bring up the notion of trust and truth. You saw I don't know how to tell you guys this, but we from the East never thought there was truth. It's all context, and so it's interesting that the brain is bringing up all of these issues, and it really provides a bridge towards understanding between cultures. Partly because of colonization, many of the deep ideas of 6,000-year-old civilizations, like the one I spring from, actually don't have such a reductionist view of the world. And so I'm completely reminded watching Confessions of a Cyborg of this first cyborg I knew, who is Douglas Engelbart, because he had a very, very bad memory, and he invented NLS, the online system, to help him keep track of everything. And the online system really drove human-computer interface that we have today. So these are just my thoughts on hearing Jerry today. Thank you.
Maylin, do we have all day to talk about this? You've just opened beautiful questions I love. And a piece of what's happening here, I think, is that these issues are opening kind of existential questions about capitalism, liberalism, democracy, religion, all the things that are important. And we often use words like democracy and we don't really know what they mean. We use words like trust and we don't really know what they mean, and truth. And this is just going to unpack all those right in front of us on the table, like smelly fish from the market. And we're going to have to deal with them in some way, because we have to sort through this in a way that makes it work. Now, there's a future in which this whole thing gets spoiled badly and tainted to the point where people don't want to touch it. And I can foresee backlash and other kinds of things happening out in the future. But this to me really is like a piece of a future that I would love to participate in, and not just because I've got 25 years in a quirky tool, but because I see that this is a path forward to solving a lot of things. And that if we don't, so I put in the chat, decolonizing both our brains, like our wet brains, but also our software brains. I'm in a couple discussions around how ChatGPT, when asked to name 10 philosophers, names 10 dead white guys. And it's like, because that's the default of the Western canon, or whatever body of work it was fed to train on, right? And then if you say, hey, think decolonial, pretend that you're someone else, now name 10, pretend that you're Howard Zinn, now name 10 philosophers, and the list gets a lot better, right? But you have to adapt for it, you have to give it windage, because the assumptions and the biases are in fact baked in. All these things need to be brought up, worked out, and I think I draw a little distinction. I'm borrowing from people. There's a difference between call out culture and call in culture. In call out culture, you yell at somebody and then you try to destroy their livelihood, make sure they get fired and never work again, deplatform them, et cetera, et cetera. In call in culture, you say, hey, you did something that doesn't really work for society. Can we talk about that? And how do we find a way to collaborate and to work together? And I'm a big fan of calling in, not calling out. And for all these issues, we need to sort of walk in and start doing that, because we don't realize how much the colonial outlook affects everything we do and say and think and believe. I was in a small group meeting years ago where Dick Foster, the inventor of the S-curve, famous McKinsey partner, gave what seemed like a valedictory talk. And I was like, ooh, he's worked for 20 years on this talk. And then he starts with Plato and Aristotle. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, you asshole. I'm like logic, Western logic is not the foundations of everything that is worthwhile and that we should build everything from. We knew a lot of things before, and then we went around the world systematically destroying it. All of that narrative that I'm telling you right now is actually in my brain with evidence and books and artifacts. I have a canon, like there's the Western canon, I have the Jerry canon, but I have the non-white guy canon in my brain, which I'll put a link to in the brain, which has a bunch of books, and I'd love more recommendations of, if you want to stop thinking exclusively like a white Western, like one of the pale patriarchal penis people, here's a good place to start. So Malin, thank you for your question. It's actually really, really hugely important. Ilan.
Thanks. First of all, wonderful, fascinating talk, which I learned a great deal from, just at least to start learning, let's put it that way. I just had the thought, because then reflects my own bias and interests, that what's interesting also in terms of trust, but maybe more broadly of social interaction, is the question of how multiple brains might see similar issues. So where are the kinds of connections that we might discover? And because the question I have been working on, particularly in the last 15 years, is sort of the narratives that drive or that underlie the way people react to external events, and which are not simply a question of truth and fact-checking, but what's really the issue that they fear or hope. And I think what you've built there with your brain, which fascinates me, is that I think that is a place one might discover more of that, if one could look at these, in a sense, side by side. So thank you for those, for the idea and the thoughts. This is wonderful.
I love your question. One of my very explicit goals is to try to compare notes with people who think differently from me, and then to learn from them, and maybe to agree on stuff and agree and disagree. And in order to do that, I kind of need more people who've externalized what they think. And there aren't that many people who've done that. I mean, the way we do it now is we write a book. Like, smart people write books, and then we wrap books in digital rights management and protect the book work from everybody. And then we overprotect intellectual property for 95 years after the death of the author. If you look at the Copyright Term Extension Act right now, it's terrible. Like, we're busy denuding the commons. It's a miracle that Disney is not going to try to appears not to want to renew the copyright term another 20 years so that Mickey won't fall into the public domain, but there it goes. But this idea of comparing notes is central here, and it involves some vulnerability. I'm safe through obscurity. Nobody knows my brain exists, et cetera, et cetera. I haven't been sort of attacked for having my brain out there, but I've got my philosophical, political, and other sorts of opinions right in there. It's really easy to find them. And I'm interested in doing that with more people. And I've also made in my brain several good faith efforts to understand people who are really different from me. I watched an interview of Steve Bannon in which I wrote down his assertions, and at least half of his assertions I completely and fully agree with, and the other half to me are not so wacko. But once you've sort of taken half the things that are between us off the table, and we can buy a bottle of wine and start to talk about other stuff, that gets really interesting, and I have some hope around that dynamic. Thank you. Mark.
Hi, Jerry.
Yay.
It's great to hear you, and I just want to put in a little plug here for you that my contribution, however puny, to your Patreon every month is well spent. And
Thank you.
I recommend to everybody here that they go to your Patreon and join and contribute to these wonderful efforts that you're doing. So my question is, you mentioned the word symbiosis. I see a lot of this enhancement as really symbiosis, human enhancement symbiotically. But you also made me think about, is there something beyond symbiosis? Is there, I mean, we help the software and the software helps us. So that's symbiosis. But what's the next? Is there another step for us in humanity?
You're kind of stepping into a philosophical vortex by asking the question, because like Lynn Margulies did a lot of research on symbiosis and showed how mitochondria sort of grew into our cells as their energy and a bunch of stuff like that. And you're sort of in biochemistry or how ecological systems functions when you're talking symbiosis, which is really cool. But then when you get into hive mind, or what is mind, and how do minds achieve collaboration, or how do we, like, I did some Bohm dialogue when I lived in Manhattan, and David Bohm was a physicist who had as one of his little side dishes this process where people get together in a room, and Bohm dialogue is really subtle, but at some moment you realize that the space in the middle of the group that's talking has suddenly become special in some way you don't understand and didn't exist, and you didn't do a ritual to bring it in being. You just had a certain intention in the conversation. That's very subtle. And I'm convinced that our minds definitely do not end where our skulls, our brains are organs that live inside of our skulls. Our minds extend way beyond our brains. And there's a whole series of energies and interconnections that we haven't understood yet, that philosophies that date back tens of thousands of years have understood and tried to describe to us, but we're like, nah, pish tosh. So I think it's a full-time job to sort of follow you down that rabbit hole, but it's exciting because that's one of the places where we might actually find agreement and an ability to solve some of these problems together. And my big concern is we're busy as a civilization driving the bus off the cliff and it's on fire, unless we figure out how to trust each other and start solving things together. So for me, this quest isn't kind of fun. This has civilizational urgency. If we don't sort out how to make better decisions together fast through some modicum of trust, we're hosed. I think the cataclysms that we're facing are quite real, and humanity has faced cataclysms before, and we can have that conversation too.
So Jerry, before we go on, we're at the bottom of the hour. And so we're going to just say thank you for all of you who are with us for the core of our time together with Jerry. And for those who want to stay for overtime for the next half hour, we'd be delighted to have you stay. Maylin, you've had an announcement at the top of our call, and I'll ask you to remind us of your request.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm speaking as the chair of the People-Centered Internet, and we are embarking on a major new initiative called the Puerto Rico Prosperity Initiative. And we are looking for leads to funders, whether they're foundations or corporations. There's an enormous amount of work that is now possible with the Census Bureau and a number of federal agencies, as well as the International Telecoms Union for looking at digital transformation that can lead to a green, resilient, digitized future. So if you have a lead, please let me know. Thank you.
Maylin will be glad to do that. And so we're now in overtime, and we'll go back to both questions that were in chat and people who've raised their hands. Pete, then we'll go to the list. Pete.
Hi. It's good to hear you talk about all this, Jerry. It's been a little while since I've heard your take, and I think I have a there's something I'd like to hear you talk a little more about. So I guess I'll try to frame up sort of a half thought that I have. I think it sort of springs from like two opposing approaches to thinking about sort of trust and action in the world, that like, you can either take as a starting point what we must do, like we need to stave off climate change, we need to, sort of big projects that require massive collaborative efforts around the world, and then try to figure out how to do that. Or another way of looking at it is like what I can do, and sort of thinking about like maybe the 5 people in the world that I really do deeply trust, and how to sort of nurture that and build out. And, I think we currently live in an era where, like, from some of the craziness that's going on in the political world and institutions that aren't able to sort of meet the tasks of the present day. Twitter gets taken over by someone who's whimsically just like blocking people and banning people, on personal preference. And yet, conversation just sort of carries on without much acknowledgement that those people can't be there anymore. And then we get whole new tools like Chat GPT when we didn't even figure out how to deal with stuff like that. So, for me personally, one of the dynamics has been to retreat a little bit more into the trying to focus on what does feel like it works to me, and like not devote as much of my attention to the bigger stuff. But, a natural consequence of that is you sort of lose even the illusion that you're having a broad influence, So I guess I feel like these are things that you touched on. I feel like Mei-Lin, you kind of touched on this as well. And I just kind of wondered if you had more to say with that as a prompt.
Pete, thank you. And it's great to see you. Thank you for your question too. So your question triggers several different things. One, and I'll put them in the chat, I just made notes to myself there. First, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed these days, like super, super easy. There's like, I have a device in my back pocket all the time that's connected to the intertubes, and for zero marginal cost every day, I can drown in a torrent of good news, bad news, disinformation, what have you. And unless I get literate and figure out what's going on, I'm sort of doomed in this little loop. This is a difficult place to exist happily. And we're seeing teen depression for a bunch of other reasons, but youth mental health is suffering. Adult mental health is suffering. This thing is a big deal. The thing you're pointing to really matters. So people who are still hopeful withdraw and say, well, who do I know? Who do I trust? What can we do? And that takes me to a couple other issues, one of which is scale. And it's like, well, if we need to change the world really largely, how are we going to do this? And the three words I've heard kill more good ideas are it won't scale. And what I mean by that is, normally when we say scale, we think engineering scale, which is what Intel does when they make a new fab. They put up 3 or 4 lines, they tune each of the lines, they take the variables on the highest yielding line, and they say, everybody replicate exactly the settings, and that'll make the most wafers from this line, okay? Scale is very different for techno-social systems, and that's what we're talking about here, is a techno-social politico-economic system, I guess, which is a series of interwoven ecosystems at different scales. And when you tell stories and get people to pick something up and then adapt it to their local setting, which is a change process I love, that achieves scale, because by scale, at the end, what we mean is we want to affect a lot of people. We want a large scale change. That's what we mean by scale. But we have to think about scale as adaptive scale or appropriative scale or in some other way. And in that view, your small group of people doing whatever you can is aces by me, like go, go, go. Can I feed you resources, stories, and tools for connecting out and expressing what you think out into the world, if you're willing to do that? Because, by the way, there's a whole lot of vigilantist and other kinds of backlash out there, so that if you express opinions that are too different from other people, it could be that your sky darkens with abuse and other sorts of things. If you're a woman online, it could be that your sky darkens with abuse just because you're a woman online, which shouldn't be happening on this planet, but is. And then the last thing I put in my little memory aid was a design from trust. And out of my quest into trust over the last 30 years, which started from realizing I didn't like the word consumer in the mid-90s when I was working for Esther, and I can point to a couple of briefings where that light bulb went off in my head, I realized that we've designed most of our institutions from mistrust of the average person. And I have heroes that I can point to in kind of each discipline who said this in their own little discipline, in their own little language. But then I kind of generalized their thesis. And it's like, wow, we've been designing institutions that don't trust people. And when you do the opposite, good things happen. It's cheaper, but also more importantly, it reconnects humans. We need to do a lot of that. So designfromtrust.com is a website where you can see a couple talks. It's a little bit better plumbed than Cyborg Confessions, but not by a lot. But happy to talk more about any of those issues, or take the question in a different direction if I missed your intentions.
Okay. Let's hear from Doug Houlihan. Delighted to have you with us.
Yeah, I really enjoy your talk, Jerry. I've been bookmarking a lot of your what you've been posting. I really like the question about can a divided American heal? Personally, I'm more concerned about that topic than artificial intelligence killing us all. And actually, can a divided world heal? It's taking it up another level. So one of my questions is, how long does it take to start this, and create this? I'm actually planning on, participating, see if I can go on to Wednesdays, your calendar, to start, because I'm a big believer in joining groups that, have this second brain, and, how to leverage these tools, artificial intelligence tools, to amplify humanity's ability. So anyway, I appreciate your comments, but I guess my specific question is, how long, if you're going to start on this, how long does it take? How long does it take, implementing this, and then weekly, what's your process? How much effort to get the benefits?
Interesting. So have you tried ChatGPT, for example?
Oh, yes, very much so. And I've tried Notion and notes and that kind of stuff. And, so I kind of have the second brain, but it's scattered a little bit. So scatterbrain of these technologies. And, I'm looking for something that makes it easy to organize. And, when Microsoft comes out with their tools with Outlook and Google with Google Docs, can I upload all my emails into this tool, and it just kind of sorts through and says, okay, now here's your everything you've done in the last 10 years. This is the information. And just like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Her, where it says, okay, you have 10,000 emails on this topic, and only 50 of them are relevant, right? And let's get rid of all the rest, So one thing about a second brain is it needs to be decluttered as much as, it needs to have the information as valuable stored. Because I'm a big believer in, there's a lot of information out there that's valuable that gets lost, and then there's a lot of junk that's cluttered around that actually clutters. There's a lot of noise in the signal, basically.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So unfortunately, Kevin, did you want to jump in?
No, I finish your thought. April's next.
Oh, okay, good. So there's no simple answer to what you're saying. You're already on board in the sense of experimenting with stuff, trying things out. And I think for many, and I'm going to say something I don't want to say, perhaps most people looking around in this sector, they're not going to sort of bump into a different level of jamming, because I have several friends who've just been hopping from tool to tool to tool to tool for 30 years. And they're experts at a couple tools, but they haven't sort of grooved a particular pattern that they like. Mastering your email inbox and also putting out posts and doing all sorts of other things, very hard to get something that has a span over all of your information. Years ago, when I thought everybody was going to be working in wikis, there was a little startup called You Need a Wiki. And what you would do is you would sign into it with your Google Docs login, and it would wrap itself around your Google Docs and create wiki words and wiki namespaces. It was brilliant. It did for Google Docs what Google didn't do for Google Docs, because Google Docs would make a very nice collaboratively edited wiki builder, but it's not. And I wish it were. They bought JotSpot, but that became Google Sites. But those tools aren't really there. I would join some conversations right now and see what's up. For the shared memory kind of thing, Open Global Mind has a bunch of conversations, but to go right into Stable Diffusion and ChatGPT, my old friend Kyle Shannon has a salon that's meeting on Meetup. called the AI Salon. Kyle has been working with Kevin and his group on different things. That's a really friendly, nice place to sort of learn what's happening and share tricks. Kyle, back in 1994-5, started the World Wide Web Artist Consortium in Manhattan. And when I was working for Esther, that's where I met a whole bunch of my buddies in New York. There were webmasters and others basically trading information for how to do this web thing. And that's what's happening now.
CyberSuds and the New York New Media Association were places to gather. All right.
So
they're defunct now.
Exactly. It's funny. Mark Stallman kind of helped catalyze the New York New Media Association. So a bunch of us were meeting at his house, and we were going to maybe do a conference that was going to take a year to organize. And I was like, guys, it's going to take like a year, and conference will last a day. Why don't we just start having a regular get together? And so we invented CyberSuds. The first one had 30 people in a Mexican restaurant on 7th Avenue. The third one was in the lobby of the IBM building and had like 1,000 people.
So the conference scene turned out to be Alan Meckler and Jean DeRose. So they jumped on it, and the rest is history. All right, so April said that she's just enjoying the conversation. So
okay. I was interested in who this April
and we're
character even
delighted
was.
that she is. Gary Bullis, come on in, Gary. You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, I didn't know I was going to need to be on deck. So no, I just wanted to show support and listen to Mr. Michalski's brain. So
Okay.
no, I'll just tell you, Jerry, and I've had this conversation, but here are the things I don't know. So first off, one of the things that's just amazing about my old friend Jerry is that he is so anchored in humanity, and he is so intentional, and he can't do something that isn't human, right? So what Jerry, what you've done with the brain, and what you so much of what you bring to the world is leading with humanity. And so when you talk about Cyborg and that sort of thing, as far as I'm concerned, that's a framing that sounds and true and resonates. But here's the things I don't know. For people who don't bring your humanity first, when we there's a bunch of false equivalencies, but the challenge that I have is that I place humans here, and I place our technologies as a tool set. And so when we start to elevate the technologies, I feel like we continually are setting the table where we're allowing the erosion of what we make unique about humans. And as we move towards cobots and things that make us equal, and I worry about the cyborg and the centaur sort of framing for people that don't think, aren't as thoughtful, that we diminish humans. And Mr. Prensky and I have had this conversation as well. I don't think of them as organs, or the reason I push for these questions is it's always important for us to project down the road 5 years, 10 years, and if we keep following that route, how many people have we dehumanized, and how many so we start giving rights to AI software. There is no such thing as an AI. I mean, it's just not like that, but we think there is. Our brains have been hacked into making technology more and more like humans. Where's that crossover point? Like, where do we just start to just make humans just far less valuable because we get so many of the same things we wanted from software? We've already got people that are building, close partners with Replica, and so I'm asking these as open questions. I don't have the answer, but I worry about that future where we have not kept anchored in our humanity, and we let our technology just keep on kind of moving up. So I know that isn't really the framing that you're using, Jerry, because you're talking about the extension of so much of what you think, and a place to instantiate it and retain it. And there's a lot of other use cases for these technologies that are different from that context. And we already have seen a lot of the potential challenges and the ripple effects and the potential harm that can come from them.
It's like a PhD session. I love this. Great question.
Always
And
is.
that's awesome. So it depends, I think, what we think of as our humanity, like what makes us human. And I think what's happening a lot right now is that we're centering that on intelligence a lot. And we're like, no, 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 no. Humans are intelligent. We are the intelligent creatures who write books and pass knowledge. And look, language made us human. And we're smarter than everything. And for me, trying to be the smartest kid on the block is a lost cause. Technology is already smarter on narrow domains. So, and I remember like watching the documentary about AlphaGo and reading all about, how Google's DeepMind basically beat the best Go player in the world. But then they took the engine called AlphaGo, which had been trained on Go games, and they said, why don't you just take the rules of Go? Well, we're not going to show you any human games. Just play against yourself until you learn Go. And that's called AlphaZero. They did the same thing with chess and a bunch of other things where the domain of operation is really restricted. Go is 19 lines by 19 lines, black and white stones. There's rules for taking territory. It's an incredibly well-defined domain, not squishy like human life. But Go got not only better than Lee Sedol, it started inventing plays that no human had invented. And as happened in freestyle chess and other kinds of chess, once Deep Blue and others beat the top chess players, smart people in those fields started figuring out, oh, wow, how do we learn from these new moves? Because the old masters had incorporated a series of biases and assumptions about what you do in this moment at a move, right? And so letting go of that, which is what machines can let us do, is great. Then I think we're going to have AGI, this generalized intelligence, because it'll be pieced together from lots of bits and snippets, and suddenly someone will figure out how to coordinate them well. But then I'll add a thought, which is trying to create software that emulates how we think, or robots that look like us and have appendages and upright walking like we do, is stupid. Like when I see androids that are trying to be humanoid androids, make me crazy. It's like, I'm sorry, there's so many different ways of efficient ways of moving. Why would you want to emulate something with so many moving parts that looks like... People, stop that. That's sort of an egoistic enterprise that I don't care about. That's the longer wind up to maybe what makes us human is the stuff Mei-Lin was pointing to. And what makes us human is our ability to sit together and be together and build community and build trust and break bread and all those kinds of things. And if we're content with that and can figure out what that is and what that means together, it's okay if other things get a whole lot smarter than us. And we won't think that that endangers our humanity, because we'll be like, oh, I'm comfortable in my humanity, but I've got tools that are now smarter than me. There's a Jonathan Colton song titled Better Than Me. No, Betty and Me is the title of the song, and they're going to do a genetically engineered baby that's better than me because it's going to be taller than me, smarter than me. It's a great song. Listen to Jonathan Colton on technology stuff. But anyway, sorry for the long answer, Gary, but I think that we need to redefine a little bit where we think the boundaries of human are that we want to protect or acknowledge or live within. And I'm still comfortable there. And I'm a little uncomfortable posing myself as a cyborg, because it's like, oh, okay, so you've been eaten by the board, you're half robot. I'm like, no, I'm trying to reappropriate the term and extend it in fruitful and useful ways. And then I also want to add, thank you so much for the way you introduced your question to me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that was very thoughtful, Gary. And we're back with a follow-up from Mark Prensky. Mark.
Well, thank you, Gary, for citing my name in the conversation. So here's the thought that you sparked in me, Jerry, when you talked about civilizational threats and change. That levels, there's a civilizational level, and that is multiple levels, as Mei-Lin referred to, East versus West, other kinds of civilization. Then there's a human level. And then, of course, there's all the things that we don't have sensors to detect. So there's a cosmic level, right? Which is clearly much bigger than us because our sensors are so limited. And you might want to invite Divya Chandler. I had a great conversation with her the other day. And so the question is, which are we talking about, civilization, or are we talking about humanity? And which are we really centered on? Because I think it might be more civilization that humanity is going to expand and go and do whatever humanity does, and we will have probably very little control about that, over that in the long term. But civilization is what we do control and can have a lot of influence on. So maybe we're really civilization centered and wanting to build the best civilization that we can, as opposed to the best species that we can.
Awesome question, Mark. And it takes me someplace interesting, because I will confess to a rather jaded opinion of the word civilization. And that's because I read Against the Grain by James Scott and The Dawn of Everything by Graeber and Wengrow. And it's like, in China, they called civilized people cooked people, and the people who were still living outside the cities, who had healthier diets and were living on the land and mutually reliant, were the uncooked. And often bringing people inside civilization made their lives a lot worse. And then you get wars at a large scale because civilizations can build standing armies and get bigger weapons, and all that kind of stuff sort of plays out. So I'm not the biggest fan of what we call civilization. And I don't assume that being civilized is necessarily always better. We managed also along the way to demonize anarchism. Another of Scott's books is 2 Cheers for Anarchism, where he's like, hey, these people are trying to figure out, how do we live together as a society with minimal government, but with maximal benefit for all of us? And we managed to make sure that nobody even talks about anarchism, because anarchism, of course, just means chaos. But there's like 40 flavors of anarchism, and I am no scholar of it. But I'm very interested in that sort of set of discussions. That said, I'm not sure where the differences are between civilization and humanity. And so in the sense of, when I say this has civilizational importance, I'm using the word loosely, and I'm not even putting in my anger about the term, but I mean that we could wipe ourselves out as a species on Earth because of the stupid things we're doing. And afterward, the Earth might heal quite nicely. Thank you very much. And as Mr. Smith, Agent Smith said in The Matrix, we were just a pesky virus anyway. And thank God we're like off the planet, and you know, nature is going to be fine. Until the sun like blows up and turns into a red giant or whatever. But that's kind of where I'm coming from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was the theme of the day the Earth stood still too, right? Is Earth will be fine as long as we get rid of the virus.
Exactly.
Kind of like
humans.
the cockroaches. We don't go away.
There you go.
Well,
Exactly.
there'll always be some of us
Yeah.
somewhere. And
So
so it really is the groups that we put together to do what you just described about living, you know, benefiting the maximum number of people, doing whatever it is. And we're very poor at that, obviously, right now. So anyway, I just thought that might be a useful distinction, but up to everybody.
Thank you. And you're causing me to think about it. So I appreciate that.
So last question is from Frank today before we go to wrap up. All right, Frank, are you
Elon's
with
got
us?
his hand up too, though. But go ahead.
Yeah, can I just
go
quickly
ahead,
intercede here for sorry.
You know what? I couldn't
just-
see your hand up because it's blending right into the background.
Yeah,
of
I
you.
realize it's
apologize.
hard to see. Sorry about that. I'm gonna have to change the background.
There you
Move
go.
it. Just a quick comment on the last couple of discussions, which is that I think it's not really about civilization or humanity. I think it's about humans as part of nature in the broadest sense. And if we separate this, which so many people do, seeing humanity as a separate species, if they even see it as species and not some broader category, that gets us directly into trouble. And I think the civilization is only a piece of that. And the difficulty and an issue that I deal with a lot, I mean, if we think about biodiversity, if we think about all of the sustainability issues, these really also, and for that matter, also between east, west, north, south, etc., it also has to do with the difference in the conceptions we have of our human position in the broader sense of what is the world and our, or the cosmos, if you wish. So anyway, just wanted to add that into the conversation. Again, thanks all for the discussion and the presentation, Jerry.
Thank you.
All right, Frank, jump in.
Big Sky Telegraph, come in.
Hey, you know my name. That's awesome. You must be pretty old. I'm an Eagle Scout. Trustworthiness has always been important. Honor, Native American honor. Trust education is really missing in our society. I have people tell me I can believe whatever I want to believe, and a lot of people, the last thing they feel obligated to do is be trusted. I wanted to mention the World Trust Survey, where they asked, it's been asked all over the world, do you believe people are basically good or not? Swedes believe 78%. Americans, 58%. We're divided down the middle. In Latin America, it's like 15%, I think. And in Asia, I think it might have been as low as 5%. Don't hold me to those numbers. It's worldtrustsurvey.org. But they have a new prison in El Salvador for 40,000 people, and they're filling it up. The society there has turned into gangs and violence. And I just think that, you know, if you go back to the Scout law that was created in 1911, there are 12 tenets. Things like reverence, doesn't say which religion, but it says you have to believe in something. You know, what we learned in kindergarten is what we really need to know, and that kind of applies to everything that happens online. And I'll stop there, but you know, I'll tell you, there's a African IT program that was on CNN recently where they're teaching elementary kids the basics of how to be prepared for remote work and life on the internet, even though they don't have internet. And, you know, I think, you know, starting with some level of who you are depends on whether or not you're trusted. And Jerry, I think you kind of started with that. Our humanity comes down to, Jerry, can I trust you to not shut me down if I say something? And there are big differences in the competitiveness within society. When I moved to California from Cody, Wyoming, I was called a hick. I didn't know what that was. I had to ask around, but that pretty much told me I couldn't really trust people until I got to know them. So enough for me, but I love the chat. I appreciate the intelligence of everyone involved. The world's in a real mess right now. Misinformation, lying, calling people names has become the norm, and how to combat that somehow needs to be starting with the young and teaching trust. So thanks for
Frank.
the moment.
Frank,
Jerry.
thank you. Yeah.
So react to what Frank said and give us a wrap-up thought as we conclude our call today.
Thank you. Frank, I love what you said and agree with it, and wanted to add, maybe we don't get educated in trust, but we experience it in our lives and internalize it in ways that are fruitful. Because it's one of those things, it's like, I can show you videos about riding a bicycle, I can tell you all about it, but until you've actually gotten on a bicycle and figured out the damn steering thing and pedaling thing, you don't know how to ride a bicycle. And trust is like that. Trust is very experiential. It's also very fractal, onion-like. It has so many facets and layers, right? It's much more complicated than we tend to think it is. And it's resilient and fragile at the same time, all that good stuff. So I think the precursor to sense making is some degree of trust building. And so what you just pointed to is essential. Like if we don't have a taste of trust, we need to figure that out. One of my amateur theories about how the world works is that when people experience a system that is designed from trust, which is my language, not common language, they're like, oh, that felt really counterintuitive and maybe dangerous, but it worked. It's a little bit like when they try Wikipedia. I ask audiences, do you remember the first time you tried Wikipedia? Who uses Wikipedia? 80% hands go up. Who remembers when they figured out how Wikipedia works? 70% go up. And I'm like, did your sphincter tighten? Like, what idiot thought of this thing where any fool on earth can come make changes to every page? And it works, right? And so that experience of trust, I think, leads people to want other experiences of trust as well. And I think that we're we're in a place where we can tell those stories and leave resources at hand and build community. Because without these groups of people doing stuff together, we don't make it through.
Yeah.
Global consciousness needs to be on the same page. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Jerry, thanks so much for being with us. I mean, even preceding your thoughts about being an enabled cyborg person, I have a tendency to think that you are Jerry Trustmeister Michalski, right? That is the primary thing that you have been trying to foster for decades, even before, right, the brain became an enabler of, keeping track of things for you. By the way, right, if you haven't thought about this, right, you really need to consider who you're going to leave your digital inheritance to.
So we had a call some time ago, mid-pandemic, we had a call called Jerry's Brain After Jerry.
Well, that's because you actually have created something that's quite valuable, and it needs to find a good home, right, where it will be taken care of. Thanks so much for taking care of us, right? It was a very tasty discussion today, and everything you folks do, be intentional. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks with our next guest speaker. Thanks, Jerry. Cheers.